right, it's time for another episode of the PEBAheads, and we have a very special guest this week with us. There he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Scott. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing good. I probably should adjust. We should adjust these names to say our team name, like first name, team name instead of our full names.
That's
I,
true.
I I tried that once and got in trouble with going on a work meeting with my teammates. So I'm gonna leave it as
All
my
right.
name because I forget to switch it back.
For those who don't know, that I'm the Reno Zephyrs general manager.
Yeah, and a podcast kind of pioneer here too. Don't leave
Well, remember it was the original Florida and
I think it was RJ, wasn't it? Or
yeah, it was RJ. So he was the Sand Nats, right?
Yep.
And Florida.
Ken.
The GMs were doing it and I really enjoyed it. Like they would come out, it was just audio, no video, but they would come out and I would, I'd be like, oh great, man, I get to listen to it.
Yeah.
And my wife would be like, you're listening to an hour of two guys talk about fake baseball. I'm like, yes,
Still
I
real
am.
to me. Still real to me.
yeah, it's fake baseball, but there's nothing like it. It really is.
That's right. It's the realest fake baseball around.
Exactly.
I mean, I know, like growing up, there's another game we were talking before we started the recording. We were talking about other games. One of the early Madden games on the computer had a really in-depth franchise mode, and that was what I got. Another one that I got hooked on, where it was just like as soon as we played that for a few years, and then EA started kind of taking away and not having it as good of a franchise, and I remember going over to my buddy's house all the time, and we just do like seasons at a time and
Yeah.
craziness. And
Yeah, we did the same. I remember it was the best one was when the Houston Texans were an expansion team, because after the first season
you could do that draft.
You could choose a different expansion.
Yeah.
And start there.
But yeah, the focus today is going to be Grill and Scott getting to learn more about the Reno franchise. And I mean, to kind of kick things off and hopefully not jinx you here, but is the curse officially broken now? We've got multiple seasons of Reno.
Well, not yet. Not
Oh,
yet.
yes. I guess
Things
I don't want to
could
jinx
fall,
you.
Knock on wood, right?
things could fall apart and Aurora could overtake me. And then I would say if I do not make the playoffs, I don't have to win the division because I've only done that a very small number of times, once or twice before. If I don't make the playoffs, then the jinx or the curse is still in effect. But if I've broken it by making the playoffs 2 seasons in a row, then yes, I would say the curse is broken. But we're not really going to know that for a little while now.
Reno was first two times, three times in their history.
Yeah, I looked up Aurora because I definitely consider them to be the biggest rival, but Aurora's made the postseason 25 times, and they won the division 22 times, and have 4 championships. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, look at that. I mean, that is I know Florida is this, juggernaut team right now, but that's a longevity that is pretty impressive for one team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look from 2008 to what? 2015.
It's just the X's are just amazing.
Shinseki is the other big team. I think it's got 28 in a row, 28
Yeah,
playoff appearances. That was broken last season. And if their trend continues, this year could be their second time missing it as well. But yeah, they were 5-time champs.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
28 years in a row in the playoffs. And now potentially 2 seasons of no playoffs.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's an insane amount of winning is what that is. You could
Belichick gets fired, right?
Yeah, you could pull up Reno and you'll see a lot of blank spaces.
Not many X's.
That's all right.
I mean, I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I had that. So I came into the league for the 2011 season. So I had some hundred and some, look at that, I had 121, 119, 124 lost seasons there. And then, did what anybody does is there may have been, I wouldn't say deliberate tanking, but winning was not my priority in 2011, 2012, 2013, 20. But then I was drafting and building for a run, and I made a run there, and then it just ran out of steam.
That's how you do it.
And then
like 4 or 5 years, and you get the 4 or 5 year run. And look at the bottom line though too. Look at the profit, right? You're losing 6.5 million coming in. You're getting 30 million by the time you made that first play.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. I haven't looked at that. I would be curious, like, who's the most profitable team in, I mean, I know the last podcast, I think there was, or the one before that, there was some discussion about teams not spending and salary floors versus salary caps. So I know the profit dollar amount is not necessarily a good thing, but 188 million, right?
Aurora's got 666 million over their
Well,
time.
that is crazy. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. Well, winning has a tendency to make money, right?
Yeah, I've got up Stats Lab right now, and just kind of looking at the 2039 season, and noticed something that's kind of jaw dropping to me for the IL anyway. Every team except for one made a profit. I'm like,
Interesting.
I didn't expect to see that. Like, I figured there would
Was
be.
that last year? Or?
I think we had a couple teams in the IL that are basically just their salaries are zero. It's just all minor league salaries. So,
And well, I think the league does frown upon, deficits and not being financially, fiscally sound. I mean, that's something that there's some penalties to being overspenders. So I mean, it's got its time. I mean, there were times when we were looking at my page, there were times when I lost money, and it's not like my goal is to win money or make money, but my goal obviously is to win, but I don't want to lose a bunch of money because I think it kind of cripples you. It makes it much harder to win when you're losing a lot of money.
yeah. And I think that's kind of what's scary about going through like the absolute scrape the bottom route, right? Where you get all your guys peaking at the same time. And it's like you gotta pick and choose at that point. Otherwise you just developed guys for other big market teams.
Agreed.
You don't want to go the other way either. I don't know, Scott, if you remember, because you were here. You say you were here for the 2011, 2012. I think Tempe's run where they won it in 2012. They actually, that was, I forget who was running it. It was some individual who was very, very risky, did not care about our rules around financials, and literally took on any trade for any large contract. And he went way, he was a super small market team at that time, went way over budget, ended up winning that year because he just hoarded all the best guys from teams that nobody wanted to keep their contracts. I think he was like 50, 60 million over cap. And I think that was probably why the rule actually was put into place, if I remember correctly. Because I think shortly after that, he lasted one more season. And then I forget if he left right after that and left the team in shambles or what it was. But
did he later, are you sure he didn't take like the Florida Marlins general manager job in 96, 97?
What's their bottom line? Scroll down, because there's a lot of negatives on that team. So is that
408 million
negative 408 million?
Wow. Is that a minus 408?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's hard to take that for what it's worth though, because Tempe, like New Jersey, was one of the teams that went to the Winter League, and the computers did whatever they wanted. So they had a couple years of almost 100 million loss.
Okay.
Yeah, so any team that went to the Winter League and they was at the mercy of the AI, I would not have high expectations for whatever their numbers are going to be.
Yeah, again, when it comes to making a profit, I want to, right? It's something that I strive to do. It's just not my number one goal. But I think there can be some pretty negative consequences to being in the red.
Oh yeah. definitely. Should we get back to the questions, guys?
Yeah, let's dig back into the question. No, I like it. I like the combo that we're having.
Sidetrack.
All
All
right,
right, I'll jump in next then.
Yeah, Mike, you go.
So obviously you guys are doing well. You're hopefully, knock on wood, breaking the curse and staying consistent winners now, repeating at the top. Or I don't think you were at the top last year. Where you were second place last year.
Yeah.
But repeating playoffs. So you guys think you're actual contenders to win it all rather than just get into the playoffs? Do you think you have the team set up and the team build to actually go all the way?
I don't. But I will tell you that I do think there is a certain level of luck involved in the postseason. I mean, I think 6th in runs scored. Yeah. And 5th in runs against. So not bad, just not elite level. So I would say I'm going to need, I like my team's defense. I like my starting pitching. I know there was some discussion of my team on one of the previous podcasts about after Ojeda. I do, I brought up Tony Day, who was first round draft pick. I just didn't like my number 5 guy and decided I'm going to bring up a rookie and see if I can, improve with him. His first start obviously wasn't great, but he's got some potential. 24th overall pick there. So I think that I like my starting pitching. I really like my closer a lot. Remember the closer never pitched in the minors. I drafted him last year and promoted him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
one of those rare, good enough to play right away guys.
Yeah, I don't like drafting a reliever in the first round, to be honest with you, but he seemed too good to pass up, and he could improve the team that year. When I drafted him, I fully planned on just putting him right in the majors. And as you can see, it didn't hurt him, 1.36 ERA as a rookie, that's not too shabby. So I don't think I've got what it takes to take on some of the best teams in the league. But anything can happen. So I'm going to cross my fingers if I get into the postseason and hope for the best.
I think you guys have a pretty good chance. I mean, I would, like you said, once you get to the postseason, you never know what's going to happen. You've got some good production from guys. I know we talked about Aspinwall before, as well as young guys to keep an eye on. You've got a good set of young players. You got some of the old guys in there helping out. Closer, very important. Starting pitching. Nobody wants to face Ojeda. Good chance Ojeda is going to be in the running potentially for the Golden Arm again, like he always is. So
this guy's 25 years old, 4 All-Star appearances. The only one he missed was his rookie year, where I brought him up halfway through, and 2 Golden Arm awards at 25 years old. That's pretty impressive young arm.
Yeah. And he's still got
to make everybody jealous.
Improving. He's still my scout season is still improving too. Like he's got room to grow. Yeah,
I'm hoping I can sign him. So my strategy with him right now has been to just deal with the arbitration and/or 1-year deals. Then try and sign him his last year. I think I got 2 more years of cost control. But I've got some high priced guys who should be coming off the books. So, Boyer is another interesting one. It'd be nice to have him off the books. And then Toby Ayers, he was a draft pick of mine, and I signed him for a pretty big contract. At the time I was questioning whether or not I should agree to it, but it's really tough to let a pitcher like him go at the time, where he was a pretty good pitcher. He was my ace at the time. I'm not sure he was the type of pitcher who would have been anybody's ace, but he was definitely Reno's ace at the time. So I think I overpaid a little bit to keep him. Benefit of hindsight, I think it was probably okay. I knew at the end of that deal, it was going to be,
rough,
not great. Yeah. But it's coming off the books, and that'll be, I think I'm hoping to use that freed up cash to sign Ojeda to a long-term deal. And keep my hope is to keep him I want him to retire, in a Reno uniform and hopefully be one of our first Hall of Famers, because we've got nobody who's getting any kind of votes for Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but that just seems to be a result of like the league, though. Like there should be so many guys in the Hall of Fame that I think are just not in there. Just I don't know if people are just not voting or they just refuse to vote. But it's kind of
Maybe
wild.
I think we might. I know it's the Hall of Fame; it's supposed to be elite, but we might, as a collective group, have the bar a little too high.
Yeah, I think
think so,
the way I
yeah.
think about like the Hall of Fame, and I've talked about this, I think maybe with Sean before, is like if you're writing the history of this league, could you do
Yeah.
it without including this guy's name in it?
Right.
Right.
No, you're right.
Anybody who's won MVP, the answer is no. Right. Anybody who's won a Golden Arm Award, the answer is no.
Well, especially multiple. Anybody's won
Yeah.
multiple Golden Arm Awards, right?
Yeah.
So, you could have somebody who could be hot for 1 year. Like Boyer's a great example. Stephen Boyer, my right fielder, the guy hit 54 home runs, and like 140 RBIs when he was like 26. And the dude hasn't come close to that since then. I mean, not even close. He's my most frustrating player. I mean, look at that. 26 years old, 54 homers and 141 RBIs. And look at the rest of his career. He was okay. He was pretty good a few years after that. And then he's just kind of fallen off. This year,
back this year though.
This year is one thing I will not let him bat against lefties. So he's severely restricted. Look at his ratings. I mean, he's severely restricted against lefties.
That's a big split.
But how much does that actually matter is my question. Because if like I have that same thing with, I keep going back to this guy, sorry, Jay, Don Washington, supposedly sucks completely against lefties. I think his ratings are like half what they are against righties, but I think he's still, if you actually look at his breakdown, he still bats just as well against lefties as he does against righties.
Yeah. I pay attention to the ratings, but I also pay attention to the stats. And the difference with my guy is he's not hitting lefties.
Yeah.
Lefties are kicking his ass. So, if you've got a guy whose ratings against, one side or the other are not great, that's fine. Don't pay attention to the ratings until the stats force you to, right?
Until he's batting like 100 or 120.
The problem is sometimes the stats force you to pay attention to the ratings.
What is Boyer doing against lefties? Yeah, he's batting 200.
200, yeah, 211. So yeah.
But he's murdering right-handed.
Right-handed,
yeah, his August was terrible, but that June. He was on fire in June. So
you just not to drop a little secret, but this is why I go completely heavy on the left-hand pitching, because a lot of players struggle against lefties, and we just don't have a lot of lefty good pitchers out there. So I tend to stack the board lefty and just hope for the best to try to take advantage of exactly this.
Yeah, I'm not too disappointed with the number of left-handed pitchers I have on my team. It's just I'm just always worried that you're going to stack your lefties, and then the next thing you know, the other team's just going to put a bunch of right-handed monsters against you, and then kind of negates the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I find it's easy to find left-handed outfielders, right? And hard to find left-handed hitting infielders.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting because like I also feel like there's just a bevy of talented outfielders, where it's like you could go get guys on like minimum contracts or close to it, they can give you 3 or 4 WAR.
Yeah,
infield hitters, especially middle infielders, are like near impossible to get in this league.
Yeah, that's why I don't get too excited over draft picks and prospects that are corner outfielders who look great, because I'm like, I mean, they got to be superstars, because on the free agent market, you can find a bat that's, like you said, going to be pretty good, above average for not a ton of money. But finding a center fielder who can field and hit, that's pretty hard.
Yeah.
Finding a catcher who can, play the position well and hit, that's really hard.
You have to jump a little bit earlier, but I also have, some questions I prepared as we grill Scott tonight. I guess kind of two. I'll kind of throw them in one. Like number one, like do you have a favorite player? Like, somebody that, outside of the superstars, there's somebody that like, okay, like I really just love to follow this guy's career, or, kind of to that type of thing. And then I guess along with that, it might be the same guy, but is there anybody that's really surprised you this year that's kind of come out of nowhere that you weren't expecting things from, or maybe didn't have expectations for, that's really delivering for you?
Yeah, for favorite player, it's probably going to be Ojeda, just because, like we talked about before, I mean, I do have a soft spot for that Anthony Soems, the closer that I drafted and went right into the major leagues. I mean, it's not common, right? I'm not necessarily a closer guy, who thinks that they're valuable, but I don't know.
Yeah, you can put him in the breath with a great starter.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the fact that he just went from the first round draft pick and never pitched a single inning in the minor leagues is kind of cool to me. So I get a soft spot for him. I have a soft spot for my center fielder. He's just a great fielding center fielder who occasionally hits really well, and then a lot of times it can't hit his way out of a paper bag, right? So, but he's just such a great fielder. He's won four Gold Gloves, which is nice. All other. I like the fielding guys. So, but at the end of the day, my favorite player is definitely going to be Ojeda. He's a true ace, not just a Reno ace. He could be the number one starter on a lot of teams, and I really haven't had that very often. I've had some good pitchers, but not someone who would be a clear number one on almost any team in the league. So
yeah, he's probably the ace on 30 staffs.
Exactly. Right. There might be a couple pitchers better than him, but there's not many. There's not more than a few, a very small number. So
yeah.
that it's hard not to pick that guy, right? He's just so good.
Yep.
And
he's your guy too. Like, it's not like you traded for him or signed
right.
him. Like, he came up through your org. Like,
correct. I don't think he's a draft pick. I think he's a
scouting guy. Yep.
Yeah.
How about anybody that surprised you this year?
Yeah, Boyer for sure. He's hitting well, and I thought he was done. I almost cut him. So at the start of the year, I was trying to decide what to do, and I ended up trading an outfielder. I can't remember the name of him, but I had an outfielder that I really thought would be decent as a backup, and I was gonna I didn't have room. It was a roster crunch, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to designate for assignment of this outfielder that I don't want to let go. But I said, well, I'll just cut Boyer. And then I slept on it. I'm like, I'll make a decision tomorrow. And I slept on it and said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I think I DFA'd the other outfielder, and I ended up trading him to one of the teams. I can't remember. I've checked on him twice this season. I'm sorry, I didn't look at his name up. His name escapes me, but ended up trading him away. He's not doing great, the other outfielder, and for some reason, Boyer he's just mashing.
You got the message when he's on the chopping block. It sounds like
so Chan Su-Chun.
Yeah, thank you. That's who it was. Yeah. I liked him. I thought he was good. Like not a starter, but good enough for. I wasn't going to start Boyer. That's why I signed Oglethorpe, right? And I had Torres. I was gonna basically make Boyer a bench player, a pinch hitting bat against righties, right? And then he just kept mashing. I'm like, okay, you just earned yourself a starting spot again. So now Oglethorpe doesn't play that often. I signed him in the offseason expecting for him to be an everyday player, and he's kind of a right-handed platoon bat for me right now.
Gotta do what works.
Contract on just 1 year, so on Oglethorpe. Bananas Oglethorpe.
Yeah. But Boyer's, I got one more year. I think next year is his last year. So we'll see if he doesn't produce, early next year, he'll either be a bench player or I'll DFA him and see if I can squeak him down to the minors. Unlikely, but he might have to get the axe at the ripe old age of 36. but he played his whole career with us. And remember, I guess someone tied him, right? One of the big stars in the league tied his 54. So Boyer had the record for the most home runs, 54 in a season. And someone a couple years, Pablo, he tied the record but didn't break it.
Yeah.
So they share that record together, and that's an impressive look. Boyer's going to have that until the day he dies. I'll gladly make him a coach.
Yep.
Well, I think
retire his number.
Yeah. No, I think that's one thing that like gets overlooked oftentimes is making players into a coach within your organization. If you have a guy that has done things that, you know, stand out, there's also has the makeup that you're looking for.
I've done it a lot. You can go to my coaching screen. My coaches are not they don't impress the program, the software program very much, but an overwhelming majority. So my manager, Antonio Morales, was my first ever draft pick in PEBA. Speedy center fielder, did pretty good, but he's not by far not a Hall of Famer, right? But I liked him. He was definitely a major leaguer. I'd call him about average for an outfielder. No pop, but he could get on base okay, but definitely a defense and speed kind of guy. I think my bench coach was one of my best hitters. Yeah, Ramon Leach was a monster. I traded, I think I got him from Florida for a first round draft pick. I'm pretty sure when he was a player. He played his whole career with Reno. So I've got,
12 years in Reno before he retired.
Yeah. So Fred Benjamin is a former pitcher. He was with Bakersfield for a long time. Again, I'm loaded with, I've got to have more former players than not for coaches. But
you just choose like your favorites, or do you choose guys who are like great too? Like
mostly look, Jay, we're talking about Reno here. Ain't a lot of greats. Okay. So and if they were great in Reno, then they're favorites. So I mean, come on.
But you bring up a good point though. So using the CP on that, if you use enough, I mean, it's not guaranteed every time, like you said, maybe every single one of their skills aren't the greatest all the time, but you can pinpoint some of those points and you have a better chance of getting at least a decent coach to start off and kind of like work through your system and grow. And I think that's probably what other teams like Shinseki and I think Florida in the past and Greg and West Virginia, and they've obviously been sinking their CP into that. And you kind of keep that good coaching system going. So I'm on board with you there. I've been doing that, I think, ever since. I don't think I started it until we brought the rookie league along and they allowed us to create those like first three coaches or whatever for the rookie league. That's when I started doing it. So I'm a little late to the game as well, but definitely something worth looking at if you got extra CP at the end of the year.
Well, it's fun. Okay. So I think the smarter play is probably to sign a coach that's pretty good and then use the points to make them great. Because I don't think any of my former players have come in very good. They're all inexperienced, but then as you start to see, they're okay at best. You probably could get a higher baseline by just picking somebody from the personnel free agents and then adding the points on them, and you can get them to great coaching a lot easier. But it's just so much more fun when the guy played for you. It just makes my experience with the game better. So I don't have the greatest coaches. My manager, so Antonio Morales, I ended up at least 2 times, maybe 3, improved him in certain areas. And I did struggle with like what areas are important when it comes to managers. I was hitting on in-game running because it seemed to make sense to me, but I didn't know for sure because he was bad at it. So I think I have 2 in-game running die rolls in 2 different seasons for him to try and get that up. But like teach pitching, he's poor, but he originally was a hitting coach, not a manager. So that makes sense. It's just my manager was Tony Carmona, which was one of my greatest ever catchers. And his relationships were horrible with my team. But I noticed that my hitting coach, Antonio Morales, had fantastic relationships. So I just let Carmona walk when his contract expired and promoted Morales and focused on that. I did notice, when it comes to the managers, that's the one time I look at a lot of different teams. And I notice, some of the winning teams, Florida, they tend to have a really, really good, coaches and managers. So like, I think I remember their manager, your manager, Jay, was like good at both hitting and pitching, where my manager sucks at one, right? And I'm like, does that matter? How much does it matter? Do I need to improve that? So I struggle on which aspects to improve for these guys. But at the end of the day, I am trying to improve my management team, and I'm also trying to keep them. I want managers that I have a connection to, that I like, and that are good.
Right. Yeah. And I think like what Ken was doing too, like with his minors, he'd start these guys as like, down in the minors, start just pouring development points into them. And he'd promote, like, look at Dave Robertson. He started out as a manager in like, AAA, then he went AA, then A, and then finally got called up to PEBA last year. And I was the one that had to pay him, of course, after. But
you're saying he was doing the die roll contribution points while he was a minor leaguer, minor league manager, to build him up, to finally promote him and make him, once he promotes him, he's a great manager.
Right.
Yeah. My guys are kind of some of them are learning on the job. So.
Yeah. And Greg does the same. If you look at West Virginia's minor leagues, like they've got pretty much, from AAA all the way down through rookie ball. It's just all kind of excellent, outstanding, amazing, like legendary, whatever.
Yeah. And that's one thing I see that. Oh, he's got a vacancy. That's interesting. I don't have that, and I worry about my player development, because if you look at my screen, there's a lot of either inexperienced, average, or poor for the minors. It's just, I find it so hard to sign the guys, and there's only so many points you can spend, right? So I can't, I think there's a limit each year. So is it
3 die rolls only?
3 die rolls amongst 3 coaches, right?
Yeah. So I will say
this
this
also kind of is like not reflective of the caliber of the coach you're getting, really. Like reputation has more to do with how well has that team done when they were managing the team or a hitting coach on the team. So Greg's had all these minor league managers for so long as well. So it's like, they're winning the division every year or whatever. So
well, this is a good question. So if you focus on any one of these guys, like this guy right here, or anyone, I look at certain things like handles development when I'm looking at a minor leaguer, right? I don't like this guy favors veterans. I usually don't like that for my minors, because you're not going to have a lot of veterans in your minor league team.
That makes sense. Yep.
Sometimes you're stuck, right? Sometimes nothing's worse than not being able to sign anybody, and you got to just take what you can get. But I focus on certain areas that seem to make sense in their, ratings. And I do, like you said, I don't pay a ton of attention to the reputation aspect. Managing style and struggles with, I don't really care too much about that. I know there was some discussion in the Slack channel today, I think it was, about the cohesion and the how the management works with each other. I did look at the first time I looked at mine, when that post was made, I went and pulled mine up. I'm like, I had forgotten, because I knew that we either eliminated it, but it sounds like we toned it down so it doesn't have a huge impact. Well,
I don't think you can eliminate it as a problem. So they tried to lower it as much as possible.
My guys love each other. They're all getting along fantastic. And I'm like, oh, well, they didn't when I first put all these guys together. So it does change. I can tell you that. And, winning has a way of making people get along.
Oh
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with my comment earlier is like, I get what OOTP was trying to do. I don't necessarily agree with what they did, but like, I think, yeah, I mean, when you could have a team of former players that got along when they were players, but then when they became coaches and they're
yeah, I
actually
agree.
doing it, then you butt heads on philosophy part of it. So it's like,
It's a different role. So you're going to
yeah,
have different personalities affected differently depending on what role they're in. I agree with that. I read, both comments and said, yeah, no, I get where both you guys were coming from.
yeah,
Um, it's frustrating, from an online league perspective that, you're working towards long-term goals, but every year they're going to come out with a new software program that are going to tell your goals. What's the old adage? Man plans, God laughs, or something. Eventually OOTP says, yeah, okay, nice plan there, pal, but we got a different plan.
yep. All right, we're
Jay's
gonna
gonna
miss
have to.
Jay here. For good to see you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for coming by, Scott. We'll see everybody soon, probably next week.
All right,
All right.
we'll see you, Jay. No,
Good
I think
deal,
that
Sean.
is the important thing. Is like, I totally agree with Dylan. Like, why throw these new features in when you can't like
Yeah.
hone in on the things that really make up the game and like fix things that are issues like that? Yeah, totally agree. Like, just let's make it work rather than
It would be nice if when they made changes that impacted how your team performs, that they could somehow have it implement over a longer period of time. But, just like, every year everybody's on pins and needles with the new version to see what happens to their prospects, right? Or their players, like, oh, what's going to happen? My player's going to turn into junk.
Yep.
I really haven't experienced that much, but I know the tension that is there. And it would be better for all of us if those changes were more gradual when they were implemented than radical.
Yeah. Well, I know Dylan's made a big point, and I agree with him, because when you do go and look at if you have a league that you have like a solo league or whatever, and you go look between 23 to 24, there's times where the individual rating doesn't change, but what shows in the new version, it is a drastic thing. You're like, what the heck is going on here? Like, how did my guy go from a 7 contact to a 5? Like, what is, it would be like, to your point, Scott, like, explain what's going on. Like,
Right.
is contact not as important anymore? Like, what do it like? How does someone go from a 7 contact down to a 5? Like, how does that happen? And then how do you have 5 contact guys? You're trying to explain this or understand it, and you have a 5 contact guy that remains as a 5 contact guy. So like, how does that work? Like, explain, just OTP, just tell us, like, this is what we're doing. This is, your guy is still, what used to be a 7, but this is what changed, or, this is how we're calculating that ranking differently. It's still important, but it maybe not the same weight as before. But
I wonder how much of that though is because I know that there's that fog of war where their ratings could technically be a little bit higher or a little bit lower than what they're showing you. So I'm wondering how much of that is just like, oh, haha, he wasn't actually a 7, he was always a 5. Here you go. Or vice versa, you thought he was a 5, he was actually a 7. And how much some of that, I guess, gets revealed or screwed up in the change and like a rescout or something. I don't know. I've had it over the years as well where pitchers have, you know, what was it? I think 2 versions ago, or it might have been last version, where they made the changes to stuff. Um, and I know like Orlando Trujillo, who's on I think Crystal Lake or Duluth, I forget where he is right now. he went from being a stuff pitcher to being a complete control pitcher, like control and movement. So I was curious how the heck that change happened. And I mean, he was still a very good pitcher. I just couldn't explain how the mechanics changed so much that he completely changed the way he pitched. And he's
Coaching.
on Crystal Lake. Yeah.
Coaching.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. See, and I know we were talking about this beforehand, but that was one thing I liked about Baseball Mogul is it would give you those little updates at the end of the season, like, oh, hey, this pitcher learned this new pitch from this other teammate or this coach.
Right.
Like I missed those details. Like you don't get that in OOTP, but like those were some of the little details and things that happened in the offseason that I enjoyed in that game.
I did see in my other league that my pitcher found a lost dog from my other teammate. So
Yeah, I do like those kind of stories. I really, you know what I hate? So I somehow got stuck in this thing where I've got too many emails and I can't delete them. So I can't read the emails.
You've
Mhm.
got the West Virginia bug.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying. It's been going on for a long time. So I cannot read emails in the league. And I miss that because there's sometimes some really goofy, stories that just make you chuckle. You're like, oh, that's pretty funny. These two players, opened up a restaurant together. You're like, oh, that's kind of funny.
Who was it last? I think it was last season that somebody lost a finger to their lawnmower. One of the pitchers.
Exactly. That's the kind of stuff I miss by not being able to read my emails.
Yeah.
That'd be really funny if it was like, oh, now they have to throw like a split finger.
Yeah. He becomes a knuckleballer.
Yeah. Totally changed their whole entire pitch makeup.
I don't remember if it was his throwing or non-throwing hand, but somebody wrote an article about it. I'd have to go back and dig it up, but definitely one of those interesting articles.
Yeah, I've gotten inspiration from those too. Like you read an email about one of your players and it's kind of quirky and you go, I'm going to expand on this. This is good and I'm going to take this a bit further.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Scott, what would you say Reno's identity as an organization would be?
Yeah, I would say I'm tempted to say good fielding because that's been something I've strived for a lot, so I do want, especially, shortstop. I even find like when it comes to third baseman, I get frustrated when a player's not fielding well. But if forced, I'd say balance. I try to I don't necessarily, it's not by design that I don't have any true superstars, but I don't want to lean on one or two or three players. I want to have a balanced team that has enough depth so that when one guy goes down, the season's not over. So I would say balance.
Okay.
That should be the correct answer, I think, for everyone. Everyone should be trying to go for balance, but obviously it's a bit of a long time till you can get there.
Yeah, and sometimes, when you got a great player, you might not be able to surround him with really, really good players. You might only be able to surround him with average players. And if you can win that way, so be it.
Yep. Got to fill the hole somehow.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch it up a little bit. What is your biggest regret move or your biggest, I guess, trade? If you've done a big trade and you regretted it later, I think everyone probably has at least one or two. Or you didn't sign a guy or.
I don't think I can think of one, to be honest with you. First, this is the advantage of not being a big trader, right? I don't, it takes a lot to get me to trade with somebody. I don't often. I'd be curious to hear from the league of how many people say, "Oh yeah, Reno reached out to me cold on a trade," because
I can't remember. I know I've reached out to you in the past about like Ken Schmidt or something, but
yeah, it's pretty rare. Now I regularly, like, I'd love to improve a catcher, but I know, was it Jay landed a big time catcher right at the trade.
Yeah, Mata out of Bakersfield.
And I'm like, I would have killed to have him on my team, but I'm just not that guy who goes trolling to try and find the trade. I'll look, I regularly, as the trade deadline was getting closer, I regularly looked through the screens and said, okay, who are the best catchers in the league? And I go, can't get him. No way I'm going to get him. Right. How am I going to get him? So I'm kind of a pessimist when it comes to that stuff. I do love the win-win trade. I know people can can think that it's too corny and not realistic, but I love it when you've got a trade that just works out for both teams. So when it comes to regrets, I literally can't think of one. It's because I'm pretty cautious when it comes to my team. I like to draft and develop. I don't do many trades. I really am not that active on the free agent market. And if you look at my team, the overwhelming majority of my team consists of draft picks and international free agents. That's by design. That's my personality. Even in my other league, I don't trade hardly ever. It's just not my thing. Now, I guess in the drafts, they're clearly, I do look pretty regularly at the draft classes from previous years. And you go, holy cow, that guy went after the guy I picked. How did I miss that? But, so there's plenty of those. I don't have them off the top of my head, but there's a lot of guys where I'm like, man, the player that came off the board after the player that I picked was way better than the guy I picked. So I'm not the best drafter, but I do my best.
Yeah, some of that is luck, some of that is development, coaches. Yeah, I know historically I've had years where one of my best players came from, I think, the third round. Mario Tessier, he's one of my elite coaches right now. I think I drafted him in the third round. He ended up being one of my best players. In New Jersey, I have some prospects that are from the sixth round that look like at least they'll be serviceable and probably can play some major league time.
Well, that's an interesting question. So the fifth round is the latest I've ever had a major leaguer. What's the latest round you've ever had somebody just be, even adequately effective on your team? Do you know? Because
I'm not taking credit for this one. This is Jay's guy, and I keep bringing him up. Don Washington, 16th rounder.
Wow.
He's got like almost 8 WAR right now, just absolutely destroying his rookie year. 16th rounder for Jay.
Because I found that like first, second, and third, not too bad. First and second, pretty.
Yeah.
But in third sometimes, but after the third round, it's pretty tough to find draft picks in the fourth and beyond that become effective PBA players.
Yeah, it's a lot of luck, I think, involved in. Yeah, you're not knowing. Like I said, my 6th round pitcher, Ken Stewart, he's coming up now. I'm gonna set him to winter ball, get him another pitch, and see if I can actually start him next year. Some of it is just luck. I've said this before. I don't know what the heck happened to Don Washington. My OOTP must have fed him steroids, but he's a 30th pick in the 16th round, so I don't know what that equates to. 32 teams or 30 teams, however many. It's a really late freaking pick, and he looks like he's the 488th pick.
He might be the latest round PEBA player ever, and that's
no.
Kind of stuff.
There's been later rounds. This
really
in Stats Lab, and I'm looking forward to having Frank on eventually as well.
So is that something we can see in Stats Lab?
You should be able to. I forget. There's a draft history screen, at least for every single team, where you can monitor, like the WAR by draft round, your best drafted players. It's one of those interesting screens if you got time to kind of just start diving through it. I know you have to go to the history page. I think it's draft history, and then you kind of start diving through, and it's got a nice breakdown of all your best players by round, who are your best players by round, and kind of how you do drafting as a team. I do remember, I think there was a 20th rounder somewhere. I'd have to go back and do some digging, but I'm sure there's somebody. Yeah, there's definitely somebody I think that's been later than Don Washington, especially since we expanded to 20 rounds. That was at least viable. I don't know if it's going to be as big of a threat, and maybe Washington will be done after 1 year. Who knows? But I mean, he's on pace for, I think, like 8.2 or something right now. Still batting near 300, going for 400 or 40 home runs currently. But yeah, you go to that screen and you get a nice little breakdown by awards. It's one of my favorite screens if you got time to look at it.
Look at that.
It's just
So Carmona and, you know, Leach. I remember Leon Valentin. He was started off as a shortstop, but I moved him to second base.
You got Toby Myers. See, he's on there. Toby Myers is one of your statistical best pitchers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But see, there you go. You got your all-star count. You've got your Gold Glovers by position. Draft history. I forget where the heck the screen was. There's some sort of like draft summary by your team.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't utilize this as well as I should, Stats Lab, because there's so much interesting stuff in there that it pays to just get yourself a drink and just start digging through it, you know?
Just get real comfortable.
It's like every time you're on there, you find some other area that either you haven't looked at in a while or you didn't even know was there. So it'll be interesting to pick Frank's mind. So are there any other teams that you pay attention to, Scott, that other than your own, like on a new sim, you download it? Are there ones that you kind of...
Yeah, Yuma for sure. I would say because I've almost considered them, you know, like you know, we're brothers. We're both basement dwellers in the, you know, in the division for quite some time. He seems to almost enjoy losing, so it's kind of fun to see what he's doing. Not necessarily to mirror, but it's interesting to look at Bob's perspective. So I definitely look at Yuma's team, probably the second most to mine, a distant second, but the second most to mine. And Aurora, you know, I look at Florida a lot too, just 'cause they're just such a juggernaut. It's interesting to see, like, can I learn like what their team looks like and what can I learn from it, right? In the off season, I find myself looking at Florida's team a lot when I'm trying to figure out how to fix what I think I need to fix. Especially after one of the down seasons, you know, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs. I'm like, okay, you know, what is this team doing that I'm not doing? So I would say those are probably the three. I'll look at like I said, I'll look at everybody, you know, at least once during the season, but I don't pay close attention to all the teams. I look at mine, every sim, I look at mine, you know, I look at mine a lot. But at least once a season, I probably get a glance at every team. And again, this is from a guy who doesn't do a lot of trading. I mean, imagine the trading teams who are, you know, Jay is a big trader, you know. I know a lot of guys are super interested in trading, so they got to look at teams. You got to look at what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and try and make them an offer that they can't refuse. So considering I don't do that, I probably look at teams a pretty decent amount, but probably less than the average GM in the league.
I think that's what I've always liked and respected about you, Scott, was that you have your team situation, but you look at what the successful teams are doing, and then you compare it to what you're doing, and then what can I learn from it, instead of just the immediate reaction of, we must stop this. Like,
yeah, I do. Yeah, you're right. That, like, I grew up dirt poor. I mean, dirt poor. Okay. Both parents on welfare. And I've never had this wealth envy where you look at the rich kids and go, oh, what? I've been like, yeah, okay. That's not me, So I've been maybe it's just the way I think in my DNA. I've been perfectly fine that some people are going to be better than me. There are people in this league who are a lot better than me at managing teams. I'm fine with that. My goal is to do the best I can and try to get better. I find that picking up, little tidbits on how people look at things or do things in this league are extremely important. I enjoy it. It's something that brings me joy. So, I get it. There's some discussion about, the teams that win all the time, but you got to remember Aurora, we just looked at their page, right? That's a team that was Florida level juggernaut, right?
14 games out right now.
The season's not over. So, I'm very, I was beating them a good chunk of last year and they caught me and buried me. But, anything can happen, right? I do find the setup of the league to be very interesting. I mean, there's no salary cap, right? There's some competitive balance aspects to the league, but not a ton. And you can win and be a juggernaut and be pretty damn unbeatable with the right moves. But everybody's got that opportunity. It's not like, nobody could be a Florida. We could all be Floridas, not tomorrow. We're going to have to work at it. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with taking my time. The issue with me is in a couple of years, I might want to tear this whole thing down. And I might want to be the second, third, or fourth overall draft pick for a few years. And I'm fine with it. Right now, I want to win. I want to win today. I want to win a championship. I want to get my first championship. I've been at least once. I think I was once or twice in the championship, series and lost them. But, I want to win that one. Once I win it, I'll probably tear it down very next year. Just because it's interesting, right? It's fun, mix it up. I like to mix it up.
I think yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's the
Chuck.
scariest thing from a competition standpoint is someone that's patient and that's willing to take the time and build that way. Because when you're competing against someone like that, it's like you got to be as patient as they are. You can't be, get impatient, make the aggressive move too early, and there's just I think that's where there's teams in our league that are kind of in that position where it's like, okay, when did they take that next step? And when they do, they're definitely going to be a threat to kind of the old guard teams that have been consistent over time. So it's definitely I think it's going to be interesting to see when they decide to go and how that does it work? Does it not work? Like, do the teams that have been consistently there, are they able to fight it off and push the other teams back? It's just definitely an interesting concept.
I think it's kind of like poker, right? I think that you need to pick your spots, but when your spot's getting close, you need to be super aggressive, right? I'm pretty passive, but there comes a time, like if you're building a team through draft picks and international free agents, and you got all these, young guys, and you're like, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to keep them at the, I'm not going to promote them. I'm going to keep them down. But there comes a time where you've got to say, oh, no, it's time to shift gears. And it is time to go hard. And that can be very beneficial, where you can be patient for a very long period of time, but you got to come out of that gate like a rocket. And you got to find every piece you need to complement those players that are ready, and then take your shot.
Good to see you, Scott. Sean, I'll jump on the next one as well. So
all right.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye, guys.
Well, Scott and I are going to get into a topic that is something that, it's something that we feel like needs to be addressed across the whole league, because there's certain things that when it comes to maximizing your revenue that you kind of need to look at, and they're not as obvious, they're not put out there by OOTP as a change, or things that you really need to focus on, and it's ticket prices. And before we got on the recording of this, we talked about, we were going back and forth and kind of explaining how things were before OOTP 24, and how there were teams that were able to, over time, get their ticket prices to a level that OOTP decided was too high based on market and fan loyalty and some other things, and they totally changed in 24 the calculation on how those things work. And I don't necessarily blame them for making the change, but it took a long time for me to get like an actual answer, because I never saw anything put out there that it was even a change. And it really came to fruition in the other league that I'm in, because I'm a high revenue team there. But in PEBA, being a team in the middle, I didn't really see any change. So it's one of those things where I don't think a lot of people that play in online leagues are really seeing the impact of it, because it doesn't change for probably 75% of the teams in the league. The calculation doesn't change really what they're seeing. And in some cases it's increasing your revenue. So you're probably like, yeah, I love this. But
well, I'm not sure that the change. Do you recall what ticket prices were like last year for the league? Because I'm not sure it's changed any behavior in our league, but it's definitely changing behavior in others.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I noticed, and I'll let Dylan get into if he wants to disclose like specific dollar amounts and setting type stuff, but what I've noticed is that the teams that, like the Floridas of the world, are facing their revenues going down, and it's some sort of change that was done with the ticket price calculation. And in regards
right, so in the previous version, as I understand this situation, was you could and I used the term exploit, and it may not be fair, but you could maximize revenue through incremental ticket price increases, as you kind of looked at a sweet spot of attendance of 70-80%. You could keep increasing, and as long as you kept the increases small and paid close attention to your attendance numbers and kept them in a range of 70-80% full capacity, you could incrementally increase over time, almost exponentially, like to the point where you could have like the average. I think the average in PEBA is 25, maybe. I'm looking at
right around there. Yep.
You could theoretically, someone could have in previous versions increased their ticket prices with some winning. I mean, obviously winning is important, because you can't have high ticket prices if you're totally, tanking it. But even a modestly winning team could see their ticket prices, at a level of $130 and still have, say, a 70-80% capacity. So there was kind of an exploit there, in that it was a gradual increase that focused on maintaining a range of capacity for your stadium that allowed you to increase it and maximize revenue. It seems like the developers changed that by implementing some type of restriction that penalizes a team whose ticket prices are too far above average ticket prices for the league. Correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the the response that I got from OOTP, and I'll share my screen here. I think it's important because it shows, one, they actually responded. A lot of times they don't respond, so it was nice that there was actual response. But Matt Arnold, the one of the developers for the game, actually replied and said that it was determined that teams being able to double or more the average ticket price without seeing a significant reduction in attendance was imbalanced. If a mid-market team in real life raised their ticket prices to be significantly higher than the rest of the league, they would suffer some serious consequences. If that's not fair in your league, I would suggest discussing it with the rest of the league members and trying to come to a solution. You could add more media revenue or adjust team market sizes, or even just have the commission give teams a loan or something for a few years to bridge finances. Which, when
And
I
I
first
think
read the response, I was like, it's good they responded, but it didn't necessarily give me the warm and fuzzies of how you handle it, because I don't like having to tweak too much of a league structure,
Right.
like how things, because I think it just opens up a big can of worms that you don't know what the consequences are going to be when you start adjusting those things too often.
Yes. So are you able to pull up that Stats Lab screen
Yeah.
that you texted me? Because I liked that, and that because I'll be honest, I have not paid that close attention to ticket prices and the throughout the league. I've wondered, like, every time I go to raise ticket prices, I'm like, is this too high? How much? I do think the incremental approach was what I've done in the past. I've tried to never increase much in any given time. And I will say this at the outset. I love, you and I talked about this, Sean. I love the fact that in this league, we can change ticket prices throughout the year. A lot of leagues that I've been in have locked it. There's a time period in preseason, and then it's locked for the season. I don't like that as much. I think it's much better this way. But I'll say, I'm Reno's third in overall attendance this year and fourth in gate revenue. So that gives me the impression that I'm kind of near where I need to be. I did raise it by $1 something last sim because Sean and I talked, so I'm like, I think, I'm pretty high on attendance, obviously, third overall in the league. I'm like, I think I could bump mine up a little bit. So I bumped it up $1 something. I'm sure I've got a little bit room to increase there. And based on the previous strategy, I would keep increasing it until I saw a slight decrease in attendance, and then I would pause.
Yeah.
And then even wait a few sims and then start again increasing to see if there is any further decrease in attendance. And at some point I don't think at any point under the previous versions of this program, you could just keep going. I mean, you could get it really, really high. I don't disagree with the developer. I don't want PEBA to have one team that is 5 times or 10 times the average ticket price. But on the other end of the flip side of that coin, I think there are some teams that are not maximizing their revenue properly. I look at Yuma, and they've got, I think they've got an $8 ticket price, but they've got a pretty high attendance. It's not bad. If you look at their attendance, they should be increasing. Like, was it Manchester?
Yeah, Manchester was like $45 a ticket, I think.
They need to look. I think Manchester needs to start decreasing incrementally starting this sim, and I think Yuma needs to start increasing starting this sim. But it does seem like a pretty decent amount of teams are doing their best to try and maximize revenue, because that's what this is all about. You're not trying to gouge the fan. You're not trying to give tickets away so that you pack your stadium. You're trying to maximize revenue so that you can use that revenue to improve your team and win. And we don't all do it perfectly, but I've tried. I think I've learned that, you got to keep an eye on that balance of ticket price and attendance and just kind of tweak it as you go throughout the season. And then again, does it lock? Do we lock before the postseason, or can you? Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing about tinkering throughout the season, is once you get to the postseason, as you've tinkered, you can kind of be at a high. I think starting out every season near the average ticket price is not the worst thing in the world. Now,
No.
if you're a Florida or a team that is regularly won, you want to be above the average at start, but I think you always want to slightly increase as your team progresses throughout the season and your attendance doesn't drop.
Yeah.
So that you're maximized come postseason, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think now with the changes to how it works, I think there used to be, like you said, that sweet spot of 70 to 80%. And now I'm more under the position of you wait till you're close to 100%, and then you start incrementally bumping it up to see how high you can get it. And then, if you do a sim or two and it's still close to 100%, you bump it up again and you try and you find that level. But I think, yeah, you're still shooting for that sweet spot is adjusted, and it's more towards the 100% level and maximizing your attendance. I know, yeah, I think when you start going through the team list, there's definitely that fluctuation or appearance of when you're seeing, I think I'll pull up here again, when you're seeing at this point of the year teams being over 3 million in fans, that's like kind of the first thing I see of, hey, maybe you should bump your
well, Yuma's the best example.
Yeah.
2.288, so 2.3 million in fans and an $8 ticket price.
Yeah.
They should be more than double that.
Yep.
And if they were, they would have more revenue.
Yep.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And I think if they did double it, you're talking, maybe somewhat of a reduction in attendance, but the amount that
But an
you're
increase,
getting on the ticket price makes it well worth it. And now with the change of how they do the calculation, if they're doing it truly on a range from the highest team versus the lowest team, and that seems like it's static now. It's not just like, if my part of my issue is if everyone just increased all their ticket prices, what would the game do? Because if we all did it, would it still be based on the range of what everyone else in the league has, or is it based on
based on the developers' comments, I would say that we would be fine.
Yeah.
Because they're concerned that the new algorithm, I'm not a computer guy. I'm a fireman, not a computer guy. But I think the new algorithm is based on average. So you should be paying close attention to the league average and try not to get too far above the league average. Now, what I think he said double. We can't have, I think his comment was, we can't have double without paying a consequence. I think that was deliberate in his wording. So you don't want to be double the league average because you'll probably pay a consequence.
Right.
And he said mid-market team. So it does matter what your market size is. So a bigger market size can sustain a higher ticket price.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, that was my biggest takeaway, was like on why I have a problem with it. And it's not that they took the steps that they did, but I think do more. You're smart computer people. Factor into it somehow like actual team performance. Because if a team is winning, fans are going to be there. Like if they're not winning, why are fans still going there when your team sucks? Like there should be some of that. It should be more than just fan interest.
A smaller mid-market team could also perform really, really well and have a high ticket price. And I get it. The New York Yankees have a much higher ticket price than the Cleveland Guardians, right?
Yep.
And I understand why that is, but there could be a scenario where a team like the Royals, might have a higher ticket price than the Yankees, even though their market's smaller.
Yeah.
Now that scenario would require them to be sustainably winning, over a long period of time, and other market forces, but it's possible for that to happen.
I mean, yeah, with the Royals, like I remember when the Royals had that run of like 3 or 4 years in a row where they were really good and put good teams out there and then played well, and it's like they're selling out a lot of games. They're not selling out all of them, but the demand's there. And if you're doing that over a long period of time, it shouldn't matter that your market's small, because you could still have a large percentage of that market still go to watch your games. Like there's got to be that part of it. But I think it's important to like talk about these things, because the developers, without being pressed on it, aren't putting it out there, and people.
Yeah, the frustrating thing is
thing.
that it was a change that we didn't know happened. Now, I'll admit I was not in on the, again, for lack of a better phrase, the exploit that was there. But if I was and I was planning on it, that would have been frustrating. So I think that they could benefit by being a little better at communicating the under the hood changes that impact the game, especially as you mentioned in your post there, online leagues that are, you got a solo league, you could scrap it and start all over again. There's no scrapping. We got history here. We just got to roll with it in an online league. You can't hit reset.
Yeah. I mean, in my other league, for people that don't know, like before we switched from 23 to 24, my projected budget was going to be like $294 million. And then you switch to 24 and it goes to 260. Right off the bat,
That's a crunch.
$34 million, even though you're a successful team and you made profit the year before, and there's nothing you did that caused this. And then now, I mean, I've won back-to-back World Series in that league. Each year my budget has gone down like $20 million a year. I think my budget now is like 240-ish, around there. And then next year it's projected to drop to 222 and then down to 206. It's like, where's the cutoff? Like, where do I stop? Like, how do I go from, like, you're over a few years, you're dropping your budget a third when you're at that level. And it's like, I made commitments to these free agents, so I can't just shop them around. Like a lot of other teams are, it's not like the other teams aren't getting my budget. Like it's not being divided. That's the other thing. The revenue is not being taken from one team and divided among the others. Like it's just going away. So it's tough, but I think there are, Matt Arnold kind of hinted at it in his post. There are things leagues can do there's settings that can be adjusted in regards to like the baseline ticket price, where if you adjust it, it'll show you a range of revenues for the league. So I know our board has been open to at least exploring or sandboxing what that would look like, to try to at least keep the same revenues that had been present in the league before, or get closer to it, so that you're not seeing a team go from, a high level revenue down to mid level just because the game changed the formula on them. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they find out when they do the testing, but at least there's something we can do rather than just deal with it.
Yep.
But it's hard because, I mean, it's hard because there's a lot of people that are like, oh, that team's, they're successful, but why do I want to change anything? Because now it's like creating more parity in the league if we have this, and it's forcing them to get rid of players or get rid of assets, and it makes the competition in the league better. And it's like, I don't disagree with you on that aspect, but it's also, you're investing all this time and effort into creating this super team or whatever, and then all of a sudden you just having to break it up because the game tells you that. It's not like you overextended yourself or, just got yourself into a bad situation that you then have created this thing. It's just the game doing it.
Yeah, but it could be similar to other mechanics that happen from one version to the next, where you've got, as we discussed earlier, you got a player who just for no explicable reason just loses ratings because the game software changed from one version to the next. So, I mean, this would be the equivalent of 2 or 3 of those guys, right? High dollar guys suddenly just no longer are good, even though they're signed to long-term deals.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's one of those things. It's like you don't want to mess with too much because then I don't know, it opens up a whole nother can of problems of things you got to deal with. But it's something I think at least us talking about it and talking about, hey, reminding people, look at your ticket price. Maybe there is an opportunity to increase revenue. I know there's a lot of talk we see on Slack of, people, the haves and have nots of revenue. And it's like,
there are things you can do.
Yeah. But make sure you're doing everything you can to make your revenue level as high as it can before you start talking about new rules or changes to curb other people's. So,
right. Agreed.
Well, is there anything I didn't ask you that
No,
you wanted to talk about before?
I think we're good. I think we went pretty long, but I enjoyed it.
Well, we'll get you on future ones here because I know, without you doing the podcast and keeping it going, it wouldn't have inspired us to keep it going because we loved it. And we're like, as soon as you get tied up with other things, life and work, we're just like, we want to keep it going because it was nice talking to other people and learning about their teams.
Yeah, I'm thrilled you guys kept it going. I'd like you to see some new guests. Every time somebody new comes on, I'm thrilled. Getting more people from the league on to add their perspective, I think would be good. Also, it's just great to put a face to a team, to a name. All of our communications are in the written form. So it's nice when you can actually have a chat, even though it's over the internet, but it's nice.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got a couple teams, got at least 3 or 4 teams that reached out that want to get on. So we're going to be getting those.
Excellent.
But I'll keep in touch with you, and if Mike or Jay can't get on, we'll see what your availability is. And
I'll be glad to be a pinch hitter for anybody.
All right, awesome. Thanks. We'll see you later, Scott.
Thanks, John.
All right, see you.